Now, thanks, David. It's been a while since we visited, but here we are about, less than 3 months into the start of college football season, and things are kind of starting to ramp up a little bit.
Yeah, I had a ranking out today, kind of trying to wrap my hands around what could be the most chaotic weeks of the season. My number 2 week is one that pertains particularly to the Mississippi schools. I can't remember which one I put on there. I think it was, oh shoot, it's when Alabama comes to Oxford, and then Mississippi State, I think, plays Texas A&M that same week. Just seems like one of those weeks that could get really crazy. So, now that we're like 75 days out from it all beginning, it's time to start doing things like that and getting a grasp on, what you can reasonably do on your social calendar this fall.
All right, so that's November 12th, where you've got Alabama in Oxford, Arkansas and LSU that weekend, Auburn and Texas A&M, Florida and South Carolina. Mississippi State actually is hosting Georgia that weekend, which, by the way, that's just 5 games I listed, and that's a lot going on one fall Saturday in November.
Yes, that's it. I've got it pulled up now as well. And I don't necessarily think that Georgia would lose at Mississippi State. I don't think many people are going to predict Ole Miss to upset Alabama, but you could see either of those outcomes. I don't think, that either of those things happening are totally unreasonable. And when you think about chaos in college football, you're talking about matchups, and look at last year, Texas A&M beating Alabama. No one would have circled that as the biggest game of the season going into it, but it turned out to be one of the biggest games of the season, or one of the most consequential. So I'm trying to look at the weeks on this schedule this season that could produce some of those fun, wacky, memorable performances. And certainly the Mississippi schools hosting, 2 college football playoff teams on the same day feels to me like something that could produce a very memorable outcome.
David, we've kind of been cherry picking teams from around the SEC and talking to people who cover them and just kind of taking a first big wide angle view. And there is, I think, a compelling storyline, at least a compelling storyline, with every team in the SEC not named Vanderbilt. And I'm not taking a shot at Vanderbilt. I just think they're so far off the radar. We'll see if Clark Lee's a good coach and he can kind of get things moving in the right direction. But there are 13 teams where there's something that's like, you know what? I can't wait to see how that plays out.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you. Vanderbilt's the one that I'm kind of down on Missouri as well. Like, I look at Missouri and I'm like, all right, what are you guys at this point in Eli Drinkwitz's tenure? They were a darling going into last season. I'm not really sure what they've become now. So maybe just like hey, what are you guys anymore? That's maybe the intrigue with Missouri. But for the most part, it's going to be amazing. I think 2 that stick out to me, 3 really. Ole Miss, Georgia, LSU. Just a revolving door at those programs in particular of personnel, to an extent that they're almost going to be unrecognizable on the field. Obviously Stetson Bennett is coming back, the quarterback of the reigning national champions, but that Georgia defense, it's going to be almost an entirely new cast of characters out there playing. Then you go to Ole Miss and you look at the quarterback. Matt Corral was the face of Ole Miss football last season.
Yeah.
Now he's gone. And, you're bringing in Zach Evans. You're bringing in a ton of new guys. Chance Campbell has moved on. The main characters on that Ole Miss team are going to be totally new as well. And then LSU under Brian Kelly, my gosh, that team is going to bear no resemblance in any way, shape, or form to LSU football from last season. So the transfer portal era makes this time of year so much fun, just kind of trying to look ahead, forecast, and figure out, like, if you're trying to predict season win totals, it is a slog to get through some of these rosters and try to really figure out, the way things are going to shape up.
And David, when you look at the SEC East, I think every sane person at least would predict that Georgia wins the East. But after that, you put Tennessee and Kentucky, and I don't think Florida's there yet, but let's just for fun put Florida in there with a first-year head coach and Billy Napier, and I feel like you could kind of pull those teams out of the hat, and you could just kind of, however you pulled them, slot them as 2, 3, 4 in the East, and maybe be right.
Yeah, I would take Georgia over the field for sure.
Yeah, no doubt.
But after that, I mean, there's 5 teams that feel like they're the second best team this year. Vanderbilt's, the exception there. But even Missouri, even though I was dogging them a minute ago, their fan base right now, if you were to turn on sports talk radio in St. Louis or Columbia and they're talking college football, their fans probably think they should be in the running to be second in the SEC East this year. So, even Kentucky with Will Levis getting a lot of first-round draft hype, that's fascinating. And then Florida fans, I mean, I think you're probably right. I think this is probably a rebuilding year, but shoot, I mean, they fired Dan Mullen midway through the season, right after he'd won 10 games. So that's a fan base with very little patience and a huge appetite to be right back in the mix. So certainly Florida fans aren't counting themselves out. So I think everybody in the East, except for Vandy and Georgia, think that they're going to be second place.
So we were talking a second ago about your column where you're kind of picking chaos Saturdays. A single game that stands out to me, and this is pretty local, and we'll do this with Mississippi State's schedule in a second as well. That October 1st game in Oxford, where Ole Miss hosts Kentucky, it's going to be the first SEC game for Ole Miss. It'll be the first home SEC game for Ole Miss. If things go well, they're going to be 4-0, and they're probably going to be a top 15 team at that point. And then you got Kentucky, who's, we think, pretty good, but I still feel like I need to see more from Will Levis to really believe in him. That just feels like it's got all the makings for a really important game for those two teams.
Yeah, you're right. That is a classic sort of swing game. I think in the case of both teams, you're like, all right, this is one we should win. The folks in Lexington think that's a winnable game for them. And of course, in Oxford, that's a game that will be perceived as a likely win entering the season as well. So, yeah, that's huge. I mean, looking at Ole Miss's schedule, it comes at a great time. I mean, I don't think Tulsa is going to be anything too much to worry about the week before. And then you got Vandy the week after. So to play a tough physical opponent like that in Kentucky, I think it sets up nicely for Ole Miss, the fact that it's at home and sandwiched between two relatively manageable opponents.
I have trouble deciding what that swing game is on the schedule for Mississippi State. I think I lean to October 8th, which would be the, 6th game of the year, when Mississippi State hosts Arkansas, because that is a winnable game, but it's also a losable game, and I would say that for both Mississippi State and Arkansas, because it kind of goes back to your point a second ago. I think both fan bases will look at that game like, yeah, that's a game we need to win. That's a game we're able to win, and then you got to go do it.
Yeah, I would say that one, or maybe even Auburn as well. I mean, Auburn is one of those teams that I think everybody else in the West thinks they should beat this year because of what they went through with Brian Harsin and how there's going to be a new quarterback now at Auburn in Zach Calzada, who had his moment against Alabama last year when he was with Texas A&M, but not a stud by any means. So I think Auburn is a game that suddenly a lot of the West opponents are circling as a likely victory. So that's Mississippi State to me has a pretty high level of variance this year. I mean, I could see Mississippi State winning 5 games, worst case. I can see them winning 9 in the best case. So it's Mississippi State's to me a chaos team. So that certainly is a middle of the season stretch there that is going to be really, really important for them.
David, last thing, Texas A&M. We only got about 45 seconds left. Are you buying big time on Jimbo and A&M, or are you more in kind of a hold? We're going to wait and see on this.
Yeah, I don't know. I think they still got to show it a little more. I mean, yeah, they got the number 1 recruiting class of 2022. How much are those guys going to help them on the field this year? That's, to me, a huge question. The quarterback play has got to be better for Texas A&M for them to realistically make the college football playoff. Kellen Mond was fine, but he wasn't good enough to get them over that hump. And I don't know if I've seen enough from Haynes King to believe that he's the guy either. So in a year in which the Aggies have managed to make Nick Saban mad, I don't necessarily think that bodes well for them, considering they have to play at Tuscaloosa this year. So for now, I think I am holding off for another year or two on the Aggies breaking through and making the playoff.
Yeah, the predict the score game is going to be fun on October 8th when Texas A&M heads to Tuscaloosa. David, thanks so much for visiting with us.